Christian parenting.
Very few issues in a marriage give people as much joy or as much pain as our topic today. I'm joined once again by Matt and Jenny Price, my senior pastor and his wife, as we discuss sexual intimacy.
I think a lot of women don't realize, the ladies have only been ladies by and large, and the men, and so they don't know how the other thinks. And men get a bad rap for all they want is sex. Yeah, but they want that intimacy. And a man isn't just generally looking for a physical release from that tension. They want for it to be mutually enjoyable.
Hey, my name is Jay Holland, and this is Let's Parent on Purpose. It's a podcast to help you thrive and not just survive your parenting years. Each week, I'll bring you an insight or an interview that will help strengthen your marriage, your family, or your personal walk with Jesus. And if you find it helpful, I encourage you to subscribe, share it with your friends, and you're welcome to go to letsparentonpurpose.com to find all kinds of past articles, issues, and resources to help your family. I'm joined once again by my senior pastor and his wife, Matt and Jenny Price, deep friends of mine, really wise and fun people to have this conversation with because they just not only have wisdom, but are transparent and funny. I would just encourage you, listen to this podcast, but don't listen to it with your kids. They're not ready yet, unless they're about to get married. It's just not for them. It's for them to experience the joy of your sexual intimacy in a thriving marriage, not to have to listen to us talk about it. Matt and Jenny, again, have been at Covenant Fellowship Baptist Church here in Stuart, Florida for 25 years this year. If you're on the Treasure Coast of South Florida and you don't have a church home, you should come check us out. If you've got a church home, you should stay at that church and make it better. I know that in this podcast, we mentioned a number of resources, and after it was over, collected a few more that might help you along the way. So I encourage you, subscribe to my Things for Thursday email list, and that's the best way to get these without having to write them down as we talk about them. You do that simply by texting the word THINGS, THINGS, to 66866. That's THINGS to 66866. Share this episode with somebody you know needs to hear it. Share it with your spouse if they're ready to listen, and have fun putting it into practice. Matt and Jenny, thanks so much for coming back after the grueling communication podcast. Now we're ready to hit the thing that everybody wants to talk about, except nobody likes to talk about.
Tithing.
That's right. So we are in our marriage series. It's time to talk about sex, and I thought, who are the greatest experts that I know?
Yeah,
and here they are. So
it's our privilege.
I feel like 30 to 40 minutes from now, there will be no sexual questions left for anybody in their lives. So
I doubt that. You got to remember, I used to be a youth pastor too. So always stump the ask any question. That was always the fun one.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've all been involved in quite a bit of premarital counseling with couples, and then postmarital counseling with couples. And one of the things I think that is quite different are the sexual expectations going into the marriage versus the reality of what happens. So in general, what do you guys see as what do people expect when they get married that sex life is going to be?
Yeah, well, I think it differs obviously depending on the couple, but in general, I think people have an assumption that when we're married, everything will be great, and everything that's difficult will go away because we'll be married then, and everything that's good will just get better. And of course, with sex, if we're doing it God's way, then that's something we save for marriage. I think the couples who have done that, and praise God for them, probably assume that everything will be especially when it's hey, I've honored God in this, and we've maintained our purity, and we've waited, and why wouldn't it be great? Why wouldn't it be easy?
Mm-hmm.
And abundant, and that we would equally desire it all the time, at least twice a day. That's a little naive, right? But, well, and I think even the expectation that the other must think about it the same way I do. And, that's one perspective.
Yeah. The must think about it makes me, I think there's some study somewhere that and it basically is a myth that kind of got out that men think about sex every 17 seconds or something like that.
I've not met that
maybe
guy,
17-year-old boys, but at some point or another, you got to do other things in life.
Well, and even 17-year-old boys during a day at the beach.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, unless you're surrounding yourself with nothing but, that's
right.
a little excessive.
Yeah, so that's a false narrative, and so it's important to erase that one from your mind because it's not true and it's not helpful.
Yeah.
For guys to think that because one, that can be well, I don't think about it every 17 seconds, so as much as I think about it, it must be good. But also for ladies to think that that's the only thing on their mind all the time.
Every man is a pervert.
Right. Yeah.
I think about chocolate every 17 seconds. Just to disappoint all the men.
Well, and there's a balance to it also. I think as a guy, it's healthy to recognize, look, no, I'm not thinking about every 17 seconds, but to recognize that our sexuality is a part of us, and it is always there. And we live in a world that has been hypersexualized and has a grossly distorted understanding of what God's intention for sex are. And sexual temptation is always there, and we should be on the alert. Again, never think that we're beyond that. It's a whole nother subject, but
yeah. So Jenny, you're going to speak for all women today, or at least all Christian women.
No pressure.
All Christian women that would listen to podcasts. We're narrowing down your demographic some. What are typical wife expectations as they go in sexually into a marriage?
Well, I know we're speaking to an audience of a lot of believers, and I do think wonderful if there are people who waited, and there's plenty that did not. So I just want to, Christians in both of those categories, women, I'm seeing all of their faces right now and what it is that they're expecting. I do think the romance and the easy, that it would be this natural falling into bed and everything would just happen easily and without a whole lot of time. And so I think the romance expectation is pretty high for women, and that sex would be easy, and it's not.
Yeah. I think that, for even those that technically waited, as far as Christians go, hey, there's an alarm. Even for those that was my phone that I didn't silence in there, and I'm not going to edit it out just so that you guys realize how lack of thought I have in things sometimes. But anyway, those who have technically waited have also technically danced lines like crazy.
Oh yeah.
A lot of times. And so you think that marriage is going to be a relief when all of a sudden sometimes there's a lot of guilt that you bring in from all of the lines that you danced. So things that you fought to not do, now all of a sudden you're free to do and you don't feel the freedom to do. So, and also I think that you think of a rubber band and the power of a rubber band is distance, stretching point A from point B, the elasticity brings them back together. And so I think a lot of times in the dating relationship and the engagement leading up to marriage, because you have that distance, there's a lot more tension. Yeah, there's a lot more tension and even sexual tension as you come back together. But then when you're there all the time, or at least relatively speaking all the time, you don't create the healthy, sexy tension, sexual tension to want to come back together in that way. And while one spouse, and it's not always the husband, while one spouse might have a pretty high and pretty instantaneous sex drive, the other one needs that buildup and needs that work. And so there can be a lot of frustration in there.
That's a good book title. Healthy, sexy tension.
Healthy, sexy tension. All right. That's going to be my third book.
I'll work on that one. You could probably speak to that.
Yeah. I think, last podcast was about communication. To me, this is all about, let's talk about sex. The more that Matt and I have talked about expectations and talked about that buildup. And for us, practically speaking, today, as a almost 50-year-old woman who's had a lot of who's in this new hormonal cycle they call menopause.
Congratulations.
I know, it's exciting. They should give certificates. I haven't seen them giving those yet. And for me, it's, hey, let's have a date Thursday night. And it's just Tuesday. So the sexual tension is 2 days long.
That's code, by the way.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah, it's not a bonefish grill. It's
And-
a date.
Okay.
And we have to be, sometimes we have to clarify this. Is this like I'm taking you to dinner? Or we're having sex? Because it's a different for me. Right?
Yeah.
I need a little. I need to make sure I don't miss this.
Yeah, when I was in Nashville, we had friends and they had like a lot of children, and so their code was, "We're gonna go shop at Target." So that was their code. Except like sometimes you do shop at Target, although like when you got a lot of little kids and not a lot of money, you don't shop at Target very much. Hopefully, you're doing the code word for shopping at Target.
Maybe that was their foreplay
I
trip
guess
to
so.
Target. No, I think. And by the way, the sex date it is often preceded by dinner. Right? So just to be clear, it's not like, this is all I'm after. I don't have to buy you dinner. Yeah, but communicating about like, hey, that's basically I need to be together. I need to anticipate that and prioritize it. And like for us, a lot of times if I'm working late, if we don't go to bed together, Jenny needs her sleep, needs more than I do, and or at least is conditioned to that. It's probably my dysfunction.
I'm a bionic woman.
Yeah,
She requires
but
more sleep.
yeah, so it would be real easy for me to just be working on stuff, and she's in there going, that must be pretty interesting here, So sometimes I miss the cues. So the more obvious, it's good in general for women to understand that this is a communication thing, but certainly around sex, men, don't read the fine print of your brain. You gotta help us.
Yeah.
We're pretty like, you make it plain, we're not gonna miss it. But don't assume or depend on us being so
Intuitive.
Intuitive, that's the word. Thank you. Like in the movies where it just all happens naturally. It's like, well, sometimes that might happen, but probably not a good plan moving forward. But I was going to ask about Jay's prior question about, expectations and challenges and stuff, and baggage, and anything you would share about that, because I know that's part of your testimony.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I mean, the statistics are pretty clear that 1 in 4 women, and those are the women who are talking about it, have a history of some sexual abuse. And I would say our first number of years of marriage were very unenjoyable for me. Sex was a commitment, and it was something that I absolutely chose into well.
It was pretty good for me, but it's been better since.
And there's a lot of personal story behind that. And the most important part is God allowed me to see that I had experienced a sexual abuse situation at 14, and I didn't see it until I gave birth to my first child,
Wow.
and literally did not even know about it. And
which was like 5.5 years into our marriage.
Six years in. So that was transformational to do the healing work that God was calling me to do. And it was through a Beth Moore study called Breaking Free that was magnificent, and thankful for that part of my story, and really thankful that sex became fun. Sex became passionate. It became not dirty, not shameful, not something that was just this getting through it.
Or drudging up past painful things.
Yeah.
And or, like you said, guilt. So,
I think that's very encouraging for listeners to understand that it doesn't always have to be the way that it is right now. Like, this is not a forever thing. So even if it's miserable, or if it's non-existent, or if it's stirs up, whether it's because of a past relationship or maybe because of something that's happened within your marriage, it stirs up, if like there's been infidelity in your marriage, or if there's been pornography addiction, sex is like, it's going to be tainted.
yeah.
But it doesn't have to stay there.
And that's too important and too special this is God's gift to us in marriage. And so, yeah. And for us, that looked like, when she started dealing with this stuff, and because some of that I think was even before, where he had said, and whether it was an abuse situation or, compromises, as you said, Jay, where technically, yes, but, he crossed the line, shouldn't have crossed. And there's guilt and there's stuff. And being, part of that is just the fear of, like, when you assume that your spouse assumes that you're pure or whatever, and that there might be some rejection, like, and I'm afraid to not only to experience that rejection, I'm afraid to hurt my spouse by sharing something that I haven't been completely open about. Maybe it's because I wasn't able to even connect with it. But yeah, to be able to take that risk, and ultimately that's what intimacy is. It's a part of it is risk.
Yeah.
And that's why marriage is so important. And that's why even sex outside of marriage, where, we have this silly idea that, like, oh, well, this, we're practicing, or this is gonna give me the intimacy I long for. Really, it's only in marriage that happens. Otherwise, it creates greater insecurity and fear of rejection and all that. But to be able to come in to say, hey, this is something I've been dealing with. I didn't realize this was an issue, but I'm like, whether it's I can't engage in this, or there's something that's here that just I need to share with you, and of course the encouragement to the one hearing that, to say, hey, like, you are not getting a perfect person, and you're getting a person that's made mistakes and is human and flawed and all that. So to be able to give grace there, which completely just diffuses the shame and the guilt, and that's the way healing happens, is when it's like, I'm afraid I'm going to be rejected, but I'm going to put it out here. I'm going to trust you, and then you handled that with grace, and you didn't reject me, and little by little you get free of those things in marriage, and sex is certainly one of those where it's a blessing to both of you.
Yeah, I remember hearing a statement sometime that was just talking about how, like, the big lie of our culture is that great sex is it's like physical perfection, and that's not the exact word, but like great sex is like phenomenal physical sex, when the truth is, like, great sex is highly relational. And that
Yeah.
the biggest and most important sexual organ in your body is the brain.
Yep.
The physicality that our culture has stripped sex to be is damaging in so many ways. Like, we see it damaging our little children now. We see it damaging our teenagers, and that damage stays in marriage in so many different ways. From the, just the fact that, so, like, I'm a man in my 40s, which means that like, demographically, I'm going to be attacked by every advertising agency on earth to sell everything using the physical bodies of young women, whether I'm exploring that option or not. Just, I mean, like, Google and Facebook and Apple and everybody else, they know my age, they know my gender. That's plenty.
Yep.
And so it doesn't matter what it is. Like, you're going to be bombarded with that physical, and it does damage to the soul, and it does damage to the brain. And so as we get into marriage, like, the physical is very important, but it starts in the mind if you're really going to get somewhere. And so I'd love to spend some time just addressing intimacy killers, the things that just make like positive sexual experiences in a marriage difficult, and they're mostly brain things. So what are some of the different commonalities as you've experienced or walked through counseling with people, or just, because you're so wise? What are some of the intimacy killers that plague us? So,
I like that, because we're so wise.
Yes,
That's
like,
rather than saying,
it's like,
because you've been married a long time and you've obviously made a lot of dumb mistakes
Right.
yourself. So, which is
Cumulative
what gives us
wisdom.
wisdom. Yeah.
What's funny? I know the first thing I'm probably supposed to think about is like pornography and
I don't know
all,
what you're supposed to think about.
but what I really first think about is children. Children can be an intimacy killer because one parent is prioritizing children over the marriage. And that's not always mom. It is often mom. And using kids as an excuse, even nursing babies as an excuse to not be involved sexually with your spouse. So that's to me an intimacy killer. I mean, grocery lists, the tasks of life could also be that and I'm talking as a female.
Mhm.
Those are the things that I'm thinking of, literally to the point that if there are children outside of the bedroom door for me watching movies, it doesn't work for me to be having intimacy.
Right.
Yeah, I can block that out. Just pretend they're on the other side of the door. They have no idea what's happening. Yeah, well, busyness in general, but yeah, but the kids thing, I think that's something that starts like from the beginning. I mentioned the growing kids God's way during the communication from the very beginning. If couples can get this, like this husband wife relationship, this is the one flesh relationship. This is the most important sacred relationship in the family upon which all other things will be based, and prioritizing that and recognize that your intimacy, your togetherness, and your sex being a part of that is essential. And so things like having kids in the bed, like, man, your bed is for you.
Mhm.
And this isn't literally, I mean, I'll speak strongly on it. This is not a matter of opinion. The marriage bed is for the husband and wife. Best way to keep your kids out of your bed is to keep them out of your room. And we all love our kids. And trust me, you don't want your kids walking in years later when you're in the middle of having sex. So best way to do it is from the very beginning. Hey, that's mom and dad's room. You don't go in there. And why do parents want kids in the bed? Well, when they're little and they're nursing, I get it. It's easier, and it's also how you might roll over on your child. But again, giving them the opportunity to establish independence even early on, and saying, hey, no, mom and dad's room, that's for mom and dad, and that's where we have mom and dad time. And as your kids get older, they'll be grossed out even by that kind of comment. But man, draw that line and do not let them in your bed, because it's codependence on the part of the parents, and it develops unhealthy things for the kids as well. So that would be one thing. You protect that environment. Beyond that, there's lots of things. So
just in the realm of children, I mean, we could do 10 hours of different ways that children are intimacy killers. They're little terrorists to your intimacy. They are not wired to want and delight in your intimacy, although they need it. They desperately need it.
And the irony is that when if you have the kids that are always wanting to get in mom and dad's bed, even when they're a little older, why is that? Why do they want to be a part of that? It's because you're together. And sometimes that's the only time that kids see mom and dad together. And that is what gives them security. Man, they want to be right in the middle of that. And that's why that's, again, that the value of that whole couch, taking time to be together and saying to your kids, hey, mom and dad love you, but we love each other even more. And our relationship is important. We need time alone, apart from you, and creating those boundaries. And once you do that and give your kids the opportunity to see you do that, then they're much less likely to want to interrupt that time, and much more able when you say, okay, guys, we're going to set up a video here, and you guys are going to watch Winnie the Pooh or whatever, and nobody leaves this room. They'll do that if you've established those boundaries and not allowed them to continue to do that. Other killers, obviously, pornography, yes, absolutely, that's one. Busyness, you're just so busy and you're tired. But I think too, just unrealistic expectations, like thinking that the way you think and feel has got to be the way that your spouse does. And so, yeah, a guy can, it's the saying, like, men are like microwaves, women are like crock pots. It generally speaking take a little longer. And for a guy, most of the time, he can turn that sucker on, boom, without preparation, and especially being visually awakened. But you can't do that to your wife. Like, she needs time, and there's a process. And I mean, the other would just be, being a jerk. Is a really like, some guys can't. Man, I can't figure out why my wife doesn't want to have sex. It's like, well, maybe it's not just that. Maybe she just doesn't want to be around you because you're not very pleasant, and you don't treat her with dignity, or like you can't separate out intimacy apart from your relationship. And if a wife has a great need to feel loved and for security, and that's not just about having ADT put an alarm system on the house and bringing home the paycheck. Like, if she doesn't feel emotionally safe, you can kiss that goodbye. And so yeah, it's like what makes for a great sex life is a great marriage, and not turning to all these other things that that will undermine that. So.
Let's Parent on Purpose has always been about equipping moms and dads to build thriving families centered around the hope of the gospel. If you regularly listen to this podcast, you're actually among a community of parents that spans 68 countries, including many in the 1040 window, where there are few churches and limited access to the gospel. As the amount of content I produce over the years grows, so do the cost of maintaining, storing, and producing all of the different details that help make this show helpful. If God has put you in a place where you might be able to help a little bit and support this work, would you please consider going to letsparentonpurpose.com/support and either giving a one-time gift or becoming a regular supporter through Patreon? If you're not in a good place to support the show, that's fine. I pray you continue listening, growing, and sharing it with others. That's it. No hard push. Just a simple request that if you're able to and would like to, help share the load of the show at www.letsparentonpurpose.com/support. Matt, one of the things you mentioned, though, that men are like microwave, women are like crock pots. Again, we're talking like in general.
Right. Not
and
universally.
So a couple other realities that are quite common. Somebody's going to have a stronger sex drive in your marriage than the other. It's very unlikely that you both are going to have the same sex drive. And it may change as time goes on, who is who.
Right.
And there are plenty of things that can affect that. Work stress can affect that. The busyness of life, lack of sleep, health problems can affect it, emotions of what you're dealing with, and a lot of different things. But I think also if it's a female that has a stronger sex drive than the male, then a couple other things that can happen with that is a woman can feel rejected. Because when the truth is maybe he's just in a season, or maybe he's just has the kind of wiring where he is more like a crock pot. But the other is, if that's known, then you can start to get into like the sex drive getting squashed even lower in the man, because he feels this pressure that like he can't live up to your needs. And so this is again where like communication is so incredibly important. We have to talk through these things. We have to lower the pressure and lower the bar. And hey, we're committed to each other for 75 to 80 years. If God gives us that on earth, there's a lot of time for sex. Let's lower the sense of urgency, but let's also address things that need to be addressed. And so if that's talking to a doctor, that's great. If it's talking to a counselor or a therapist, that's great. If it's eliminating some of the things from life that are sucking your soul away, let's work on doing that too, because it's really important. Jenny, you have talked to quite a few wives that do feel like, man, my husband seems to only show interest in me when it's time for sex. And it's not super complicated, I think. But like, what are some, again, basic things to encourage husbands if your wife has verbalized, or you think your wife has verbalized something like that, and they need to hear it from another source? What are some simple suggestions for the husband in that realm?
Fill the other cups. There are other cups that your wife has. They're not big things. They're little things. What is your wife's love language? Make sure that's being met, and you're going to be winning at sex even more, because she's going to be winning. She's going to be able to meet you there and feel safe. So I think what Matt said, that feeling of security and emotional safety is critical for a woman before she enjoys sex.
And I think part of Jay's question, if I heard this right, was, what do you say to the guys when their wife is expressing a desire for more sex maybe than they are?
No.
Okay.
But okay, let's say
that's
that
another
Matt,
one, right?
That was going to be my next question.
Okay. All
I
right.
got the question.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
Jenny
Okay.
did.
My
She gets
bad.
the gold star. You get a bronze
I
star,
was
but you
thinking
can
ahead
redeem it
to the
if you can
next
pull this
question.
question out. So.
Yeah. Well, as you said, I mean, first of all, the guy's got to be honest with himself, and there are multiple reasons why a guy might not be able to or be as interested in that, and some of that's history, possibility of abuse. Sometimes there are physical things,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, as a guy, this is not one I've had to deal with, but I just can imagine to go to your doctor, even as a young guy, and say, "Yeah, I'm struggling with my sex drive. It's not there." Um, there are things that might be going on in your body that need to be addressed. And of course, there are other issues. Sometimes it's because a guy is having those needs met
Yeah.
elsewhere,
Yeah.
and or by himself, with pornography or masturbation or whatever. That's a problem, and that needs to be addressed. And that's something too where there's a lot of shame around that. And so if a guy is dealing with that, that's where you not only seek help but accountability. And I think part of it is you've got to think through how to do this, because you don't want to devastate your wife even more to feel rejection on top of rejection. But it is generally helpful for the wife to know what's going on with her husband,
Mm-hmm.
and to say, hey, this is a struggle I've had, and I am working on it with help, and there's a credible plan. Assuming that those things aren't the case, then again, this is where I think communication is so important. And we were years into our marriage before we really felt the level of comfort with each other and with ourselves, probably more ourselves, to be able to speak openly about about sex and about our needs, and about, like, I mean, sometimes even the difference is like, yeah, that doesn't do anything for me.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes, regardless of how we get there, people have this idea that, oh yeah, this is going to be great. She's going to love this, or vice versa. And I mean, again, it's not about a matter of mechanics or that sort of thing, which the world tends to think, oh, you can have the perfect person and the perfect technique and all of this, and we're going to help ourselves out. But no, it's more about recognizing what are the barriers, and most of them are emotional. Some of
Mm-hmm.
them may be physical, but just to be able to say, hey, I want for this to be good for you. And I think a lot of women don't realize, and I talk about this with guys, and have with groups of ladies as well, because they've the ladies have only been ladies by and
Mm-hmm.
large, and the men, and so we don't know how the other thinks. And men get a bad rap for, like, oh, all they want is sex. Like, well, yeah, but they want that intimacy. And a man isn't just generally looking for physical release from that tension. They want for it to be um, mutually enjoyable. I mean, no guy that's married is particularly. I mean, sometimes it's like, hey, I appreciate you taking one for the team here, but as a rule, you don't want sex to be something that your wife subjects herself to
Right. Yeah.
willingly, and it's not enjoyable for her. That's not going to motivate a guy to, or make him feel like he's cutting it in that category. So for a wife to even understand, like, hey, you know what, this may take more effort for you.
Mm-hmm.
It may take more time, but it's generally something your husband wants for you to enjoy it. And as a husband, there's the other side. Like, you can't put the pressure on your wife, that, like, she's got to have an orgasm every time. That's not important to her, and she doesn't need that. And it might not happen. It probably won't happen. It definitely won't happen. But
Wait.
generally speaking, like, every time, because it's just much easier for a guy and much faster. But for the woman to even recognize and understand, what, he wants to satisfy me, and that's a good thing, and should be celebrated and acknowledged and given dignity.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just, well, my husband, he's this, sexual, just insatiable hunger for this, and I'm just going to be here and participate only in body and
Mm-hmm.
not in spirit. And what that does, you don't want to put that pressure on the wife, but at least if that's important, then that's where the communication comes in. where she can say, hey, yeah, it takes longer, and these are the things that, like, I want that, and these are the things that will help me get there, and you might have to have a different process. Sometimes, a little chivalry in sex is good, ladies first, and whatever works for you that is, mutually beneficial. Probably be careful how much more I say. But again, like where the guy doesn't feel like he's like less than or in any way dishonorable by desiring his wife, or that the wife would put him on it. And yeah, the guy needs to know, hey, and this is where the wife can share, like, hey, I'm not sure that I'm there, but I want to be there for you.
Yeah.
And that's okay from time to time. And it's not okay. And you see this a lot, like, oh, we haven't had sex in years. Like, what? Like, you got to do something about that. Like, it's way too, that's not okay. It's a way too important a part of your marriage, and too powerful of a gift that God's given you to just say, well, this doesn't work out. This is not going to be a part of our marriage. Unless you are physically disabled, and even then, I think you figure out something.
Yeah. So I think we've rounded the conversation into where I'd wanted to be the last segment anyway, which is really setting the stage for better sex. And I say that intentionally instead of setting the stage for great sex, because oh, good grief, like that's one of those things that's just we've been bludgeoned with, and I think we've been poisoned with. And the truth is, like, sometimes sex is going to be great, sometimes it's going to be okay, and like that's still a positive, right? But what can we do in our marriage? And I think this should be the thing for every couple, is like, what can we do to continually, as we're together longer, if sex is highly relational, and that means that our relationship should be improving the longer I'm with each other. Instead, I mean, you're either coming together or you're drifting apart.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, I think it's fair to say, like, sex can get better or it can get worse as time goes on. It's typically, like, if it's the same, then typically that means that it's bad, right? Like, you've just hit a really bad stagnation period. So setting the stage for better sex. Some of the things that I've heard you say so far is like, is the communication, the lowering the pressure, the allowing, like, you go into sex to please your partner, but also you got to be careful that it's not a fantasy pleasing of your partner, that like you've been poisoned by movies and books and however long you've been alive of Taco Bell and Bud Light and car insurance commercials that have destroyed your idea of like what sex is about. So like, pleasing your spouse is pleasing your spouse. It's not pleasing your fantasy of what great sex should be like. But Jenny, what are some other things just helpful for setting the stage for better sex as you progress in marriage?
I love that Matt said it's not about techniques. It is about teaching one another what's working right now.
Yeah.
And I think teaching is different than mastering a technique. That sounds so impersonal.
Mm-hmm.
So
that sounds like a Cosmopolitan magazine that they used to stick in the magazine counters all the time.
And really even the language of like coaching. I mean, kind of this like, help me help you.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
I'm going to use language we use in our bedroom. Like, I need you to show me what you mean. I mean, like, that's fun. That's exciting to be vulnerable enough to say, I do not know how to do that, and I'm willing to try, and I need your support. Like, to me, that's going to bless every area of our marriage when we can play that kind of a game in the bedroom together.
I think it's Andy Stanley that I first heard the definition of intimacy being to know somebody and be fully known without fear of rejection. Mm-hmm. And that is the beauty of sex in a healthy marriage in comparison to any sexual activity anywhere else. Right. Is that like, I can be naked and partially in shape or not in shape whatsoever. I can be ready for performance that night or be a dud, and I don't have to fear rejection. So I can be known and fully known, which means also I can communicate, like, this works, this doesn't work, this makes me uncomfortable.
And be willing to know that in 2 months that could change.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, and I love what you said about if you're still doing the same, anywhere in any area of your life, you're settling. And so to me, we've got many, many years. We've just been married 30 years in
My
August.
goodness.
So we've got at least 40, 50 more. And
Yeah.
it is fun to be in this stage of, we're almost emptying our nest. And I appreciate you using the language of sexual tension. That is a way to make marriage better,
Mhm.
is to create playfulness, create sexual tension. And when I text Matt, hey, Thursday night, date night, like it's a real date, he's got 2 days to build,
Uh-huh.
I
you know.
prepare myself
Well, you don't really need
for
to
the
prepare
moment.
yourself.
Yeah.
It's more like I'm reminding him,
Yeah. Don't
hey,
work late that night.
let's
Right.
connect. Let's
Yeah.
connect. So
Well, and that doesn't for me just mean okay, I'm gonna have sex on Thursday night. That means all right, this is gonna be a time I need to prepare for. Not that I have to prepare myself personally, but yeah, set the stage and make sure that I mean hopefully all the time I'm treating my wife with love and dignity and affection, of course, which just outside of the bedroom, that's a big part of what makes a wife feel loved. And the guys that expect to go from zero affection, zero helpfulness, zero anything outside the bedroom, and then your wife's going to be chomping at the bit to jump you in the bedroom, and it's not going to happen. But yeah, and I can prepare myself, and even schedule wise, like
Mhm.
yeah, I need to get. I'm one of my greatest failures in life, which I'm taking on, is the absence of margin. Like
Mhm.
I need margin. Jenny needs margin. We need to prioritize this and make the whole night. Like that would be a really good night for me not to be late for dinner.
And not to be handling a really stressful phone call on the way home
Right.
before you walk in the door.
Yeah,
Wow.
not texting while
Or
I'm driving.
while you're
While we're
on the date.
driving.
Yeah, yeah. I would never do that.
I do want to emphasize the idea of pleasure, knowing that as a female, that Matt's greatest desire is to see me be satisfied in our sexual relationship gives me so much more relaxation about it.
Mm.
Like that brings him as much pleasure as the sexual act. Like that's why he's in this. And I think knowing if you're in a godly marriage that that's the intent of your husband's heart and that God can give him that intent, it's a great motivator.
Yeah, and I just want to encourage people if they're listening to this one, you might want to go a couple back. When I interviewed Stephen and Lisa Goldberg, whose marriage survived a year and a half affair, and didn't just survive. They say it is far better now than they could have ever imagined.
Yeah.
And that wasn't it survived a one night stand or a moment of infidelity. It survived a web of lies and deceit and meeting your needs somewhere else. Every marriage is healable if hearts are not hardened.
Yeah.
And so the same thing, like whatever your bedroom has been, it only has to stay that way if your heart stay hardened. But if you can soften your heart, you can open your mouth, you can communicate. You got to remember, God's the one that designed sex, and He designed it for husbands and wives as one of the greatest gifts He could possibly give us, and it should be a joy. And so, hey, thank you guys so much. We'd talk about sex for another 10 hours here, so that would be awkward though. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me add one thing.
Sure.
We mentioned this resource in the communication thing, but Willard F. Hartley's kind of classic "His Needs, Her Needs" great book with this, because you mentioned affairs, and the subtitle of that book is "Building an Affair-Proof Marriage," and he kind of the premise of it as a counselor that's counseled thousands of couples. Nobody just starts out and goes, "Today I'm going to have an affair." Right? It's always unmet needs, and really, really helpful resource in terms of understanding, hey, what are the needs of my wife? Because they're different from mine. You can't assume that what you need is what your spouse needs. And the reality is that most of the time, especially those kind of workplace and online and other type of whether they materialize in affairs or emotional connections that are have you looking forward to some interaction with someone else more than your spouse, they start with an unmet need that is often not sexual.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, this guy at work, he acts interested in me.
Mhm.
He laughs at my jokes. He wants to hear me talk. My husband acts bothered by me with all my questions. And those are the kind of things you can't separate that out from
Right.
the rest of marriage. And so being attentive to those really creates a whole environment where your sex life is just, one thing that's being, blessed by all the other
Yeah.
areas. So.
Yeah. Amen. Jenny, would you pray for us and those listening that God would bless their bedroom
Yes, I
and their
will.
marriage?
Jesus, we love you. We thank you for the work that only you can accomplish in our lives. And we thank you for that. I thank you for that in the marriage that Matt and I share, and just the growth that you continue to give us as we place ourselves in front of you. And God, I thank you for each of these listeners. I thank you for the influence of this podcast and just the impact it has on families, but Lord, particularly on marriages today. Pray for the bedrooms to become a place of sacred sacrifice, that we would be generous givers to our spouse. I thank you for the gift of marriage, that sex is for husband and wife, and that it is a reflection of just how much you long to know us. And Father, I pray for the marriage that's struggling and for the marriage that's thriving, both of them, Lord, just that you would fill them with more and more discoveries about one another. And we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Friend, if you're still listening all the way to the credits, then I hope that means that this was a particular blessing to you to hear this podcast. If so, I want to encourage you to share it with somebody else that you think might be helped by it. You're welcome to go to letsparentonpurpose.com to find out more information about show notes, about past issues, all kinds of things to help your family. And I do want to say that Let's Parent on Purpose is a user-supported podcast. And if you would like to be a part of that, you can go to letsparentonpurpose.com, learn how to be a supporter through Patreon or through a one-time gift. Thank you so much for listening. Again, share this with somebody that you know needs to hear it. Remember that parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. And we'll talk to you soon.